what are the top 3 mistakes or like pitfalls that people usually fall into when it comes to like strategizing and implementing pricing?
So I'll say one is this lack of pricing consciousness. I would bucket that into an organizational issue. Who owns pricing when the company grows up? Is there somebody who owns pricing? Does the CEO realize that nobody owns it? Do they realize that they could make more money if someone owned it? So that's number one. Number two is when you're building product, most often the question will come up, okay, what do we do for pricing? People will immediately default to a cost-based thinking. Oh, this should be more expensive because it takes us more effort to implement. That has no bearing on pricing because it has no bearing on value. Yet you will keep hearing that from very seasoned professionals, no matter where they come from. And number three is the lack of definition of your ideal customer profile or an understanding of your markets is what will confuse your pricing. So there's the organizational consciousness, there is cost thinking, and then there is lack of ICPs, which is the top 3 problems.
Hey folks, I'm Harni and you're listening to The Price Tag. Today my guest is Ajit Ghuman. He was the head of pricing and product marketing at Narvar, and then he was a director of product management, pricing and packaging at Twilio. He's written the most comprehensive book on SaaS pricing called Price to Scale. In this next 30 minutes, we dive deep into pricing, implementation, and optimization. When and how to go about it, what are some pitfalls you should avoid, and so much more. Let's get started. All right, Ajit, can you give us a history of your journey so far in product marketing and pricing, and just give us some context?
Yeah, sounds good. I don't have a long history of being at least in the pricing space. I would say my complete journey in pricing only began in 2019 from my stint at Narvar. But most of my time in SaaS and in the Silicon Valley has been in product marketing. So I've done product marketing for 5 companies. And as a result, that gives me a little bit of a different viewpoint into pricing. There are a lot of companies I worked for. Some notable ones have been Medallia, which was my first company out of grad school that eventually IPO'd. That's where I had experiences in professional services as well as product marketing. In 2019, I joined Narvar, where there was sort of a big pricing initiative that they needed help on. Learned a lot of pricing along the way. As I was learning pricing, I couldn't really find good resources, at least online. I could find blogs, but I couldn't really find good synthesized ways of how to do pricing. And if you look at what MBA school teaches you, they really teach you more how to do pricing for FMCG products. Like they teach you conjoint analysis. But SaaS is a little different. So then I just thought, okay, I have some more time. There is a lockdown going on, so I might as well just write something. And then I wrote the book, and then the concepts started to get even more clarified as I was writing it. And then more recently, I was at Twilio, where I was leading pricing for their Flex product line.
Got it. So I actually read Price to Scale, right? And I was mind blown by just how tactical and immediately implementable it was. Could you talk a bit more about the book, how it came about, and what your goal was? And if people could read only one segment or chapter, which one should it be?
I would say actually the book really was for myself wanting to learn pricing better. It was for myself, to be honest. It was a consequence of me being frustrated about not finding simplicity as well as completeness in what I saw out there. And then as I started working on pricing project myself, I realized it was not rocket science. You really did not need to learn, at least for B2B SaaS, you didn't really need to learn a lot of conjoint analysis or research methods. It was actually a lot more about marketing. So the sad part is that marketers are not confident in pricing, but you can't really do good pricing unless you understand the market well, you understand the market segments well, you understand the value proposition and positioning. So that is why I felt I had to make a sort of POV on how to do pricing, because there are a lot of pricing professionals, there is a lot of material on pricing, but those don't come from marketing people. And they don't need to be marketing people, but what they miss is if you don't understand the market or your ICP well, then you cannot do pricing well. And the second part is positioning. So positioning is you could have the same price and the same product And you see this if you go and shop for something at Costco. You'll find the same brand just with a different label at a different price point, and people don't even know it's the same thing. So there's like positioning actually plays a lot of role in pricing as well. So that's one of the things I wanted to include, because if you just look at pricing material, they don't really think much of positioning or talk much about it. But it makes all the difference, at least when you're trying to sell and make money. So that was an initial insight. As far as a chapter you should read, I would say that the packaging as well as the pricing metric are the two most important decisions. So if you just read that, even if you make mistakes on price point later on, you make mistakes on operations later on, that's easy to solve. But the packaging decisions companies make generally last with them for a few years, as well as if they have the wrong pricing metric, that lasts for a few years as well. So those are the most major decisions you make that are then hard to change when it comes time to change them.
Got it. It was interesting when you were talking about how marketers are actually very well positioned to be making these decisions. But usually in companies, pricing is done by a committee, right? Mm-hmm. Who should ideally be part of this committee?
It need not be a committee. I mean, someone needs to be empowered to do pricing. So a lot of companies will have committees, but there will be some leader who is driving the project and some leader, most likely the CEO, who's sponsoring the project. In general, if the CEO is not sponsoring it, nothing is going to happen. Marketing doesn't feel this is their day job. Product management doesn't feel it's their day job. Sales, of course, doesn't feel it's their day job. If they do it, they're going to do it badly. So a committee will form more for buy-in perspective, but I would say that someone needs to lead the project and own it completely. That could be product management, that could be product marketing, and the CXO absolutely needs to sponsor it.
Got it. That makes sense. So you're actually the pricing chair of Pavilion, where you've helped a ton of founders figure out and work on their pricing. You also have a podcast yourself, and you're also the guest in a lot of podcasts. Like, I went to Spotify trying to research you, and you've been on so many of them. Mm-hmm. So it's safe to say that you're like neck deep in this field. And with all of this experience, what are the top 3 mistakes that, or like pitfalls that people usually fall into when it comes to like strategizing and implementing pricing?
So I'd say one is this lack of pricing consciousness. A lot of companies will start from the founder would have made some decisions on the pricing metric or the packaging. For a long time, those will not get changed. So I would bucket that into an organizational issue. Who owns pricing when the company grows up? Is there somebody who owns pricing? Does the CEO realize that nobody owns it? Do they realize that they could make more money if someone owned it? So that's number one. Number 2 is, let's say now you realize that this is a problem that needs to be solved. And when you're building product, most often the question will come up, okay, what do we do for pricing? People will immediately default to a cost-based thinking. Oh, this should be more expensive because it takes us more effort to implement. That has no bearing on pricing because it has no bearing on value. Yet you will keep hearing that from very seasoned professionals, no matter where they come from. So it's never about cost unless it is you have very little margins and you're just reselling something. So some companies, AWS products will have a lot of cost. In that, cost is very important. But most software, the beauty of software is that small companies, if they're buying a product for $1,000 or let's say 100,000, a financial services company may buy the same product for $1 million or 10 million. So there is where you have to start to think about value, and there is where you start to make more mistakes. And number 3 is why I keep saying marketers are very well suited for pricing is the lack of definition of your ideal customer profile or an understanding of your markets is what will confuse your pricing, because unless your ICP is clear, your pricing cannot be determined, because your pricing is based on what your market wants and how much they're willing to pay. I'll give you an example. So I cannot name this company, but it was one of my former employers. There we were sort of pivoting the product and we were trying to say, we had this sort of software before, it was more for these traditional legacy buyers, but we are going to now be more, in quote unquote, more innovative. But none of the leaders knew what more innovative digital first solution was. So that would be written in these long 1-page documents. all of these very, very high paying executives would keep publishing their strategy notes. But whenever people would say, what does this mean? What is this product? Who is it for? They never had the answer. So years can go by, and years do go by in many organizations where they have not been able to define who the ICP is. And I would say not just for pricing, but for many other things, a lack of ICP definition kills your entire company. So there's the organizational consciousness, there is cost thinking, and then there is lack of ICPs, which is the top three problems.
Got it. So another question, which was, I think, your first point where you spoke about treating pricing disjoint from GTM and product, right? So most of the founders that we talk to and business heads, they say that I know I'm leaving money on the table because I know my pricing isn't right. I understand that I need to use pricing to really capture the value that I'm creating. But almost everyone puts away pricing iterations and experiments to maybe next quarter, maybe next year.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Is it because it's such a high touch project to take up? Why do you think that is?
It depends. If it's a early company, they are probably in the acquisition mindset. So there is probably some fear that if they increase prices, they will deter customers, especially if they're in a very competitive space. That will definitely happen. That compounded with them not exactly knowing how to go about it will compound that fear more. And then so many things complicated, right? They're not sure about how pricing will be done. No clear person in the company is going to be able to own it. Even when they make the change, some of these changes can be a lot of work because the pricing strategy is the easy part. You have to write code, right? Let's say you want to move, you have to have two models, both usage and user based. Then you have to change your product. If you want packages, again, you have to create some sort of feature flags to provision those packages when you sell. You have to update your website. So a website needs to look good. It has to have positioning. Then you have to send the right invoices and bills. This is at least a year-long project if you're overhauling your pricing. So a young company will be like, I'll do it later. Right now, I'm just trying to get to some milestone. Or maybe I will do it after the next round of funding because I don't have enough money to invest in it. And I've observed around the 10 million ARR mark, that's when sort of the first overall will happen. Then maybe at 40, 50 million, I'm just giving rough estimates that at least the consulting clients have seen and companies I've worked at. And so after that, it depends whether it becomes a consistent function or whether they do it in these batches.
So what are some inflection points when companies should actually really consider investing in price optimization and experimentation? What are some maybe external situations that, okay, so if this happens, you should definitely take a look at your pricing?
Yeah. So two things can happen. So let's say you're usage-based pricing. The economy turned and you suddenly started to make less money. That is a dire situation, and you could be caught flat-footed, in which case you may have to change the way you price, otherwise it won't be viable. And maybe you're going to make the change anyway. So some circumstances change, a new competition comes, external circumstances could cause it. Or conversely, if you are talking to customers, I cannot name this company, I was on a sales call with the company. They were saying, so we have completely usage-based model, but our customers are saying, we don't want usage-based because we actually use different parts of your product for different things. And so you are losing money on the table, Mr. Vendor. So there, so the customer is saying, you're giving too much away. There is a whole supply chain of work and I'm only paying at the end, but I want to use this and this and this. And so how do I do that? So many times you will realize that customers will hint at all of the use cases that you're solving for, or how to say, maybe they want just one use case and they don't want the other. And you realize, oh, I didn't do enough bundling of my product, right? My product is a monolith. So monolith products can have that issue where you have more money that you can get, but you're not allowing people to segment themselves.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
That's a funny story, but cool. So you hinted at this a few minutes back. You said that the implementation part is the tough part, not the strategizing. I think in chapter 7 of your book, Pricing Operations, you talk about how difficult it is to implement a price change. And I think in one of your case studies as well, Natalie Louis from Zora, she says figuring out the pricing, that's the easy part, but the implementation takes months and months and months. So why exactly is it the case, and what are some kind of pitfalls that people might fall into during implementation? Like what are things that they should watch out for to maybe reduce the time?
I think the first thing is just understanding what is the nature of a pricing overhaul, because you could think that it's just a strategy change. It's not. It's actually, I would say, it's a product change, and the product has to be in some cases not rewritten. You have to add more functionality for the pricing to work. So there is a supply chain of things that have to happen. You have to do your metering. You have to provide entitlements. Then your sales team has to be able to use this pricing. Then you have to be able to bill it. If you have a usage-based model, billing becomes much harder, right? Again, why are people resistant to doing a pricing change? Maybe they realize that the system changes are going to be very hard, or they are not metering for the right metric that they want, or the CPQ system, which I have a whole story that I can say about CPQ, but CPQ systems take so much time. You have to meet with other external consultants. They may force you to change your strategy because their data model does not support the whole thing, and costly, right? So that whole thing is going to take money and effort. So that's why I say the companies may not realize that it's going to be this complicated. How much money is it going to cost? If they realize what it is, then they can say, well, here is how we'll be agile about this, right? Maybe we'll implement one thing and we'll create manual operations so that we can at least test drive this new pricing, and we'll not be forced into doing CPQ, right? We can do manual quoting, we do manual billing for some time to test something out. So you can be agile about it, but you have to realize that it's not just a strategy. A lot of different teams have to work on it. And again, that's why executive sponsorship is important.
Yeah, makes sense. So at different stages of a company, right, who do you think should be taking this ownership ideally? And when is it the time to have maybe a pricing manager, like hiring someone just for pricing?
In general, I'm biased to the function I used to belong to. So product marketing understands customer, understands understands the differentiation. I would say they're not sufficiently resourced in any company I've been at. So if a PMM or a team of PMMs are doing it, you have to realize that they're not going to be doing anything else for some time. But they make sense. PMs, I would say PMs in a company where PMs are more outbound. If PMs are more inbound, they're just focused on features and getting features shipped. In many companies, I've realized PMs are not very market savvy or don't understand the customers that well, which is very counterintuitive because you would expect them to, but they would understand the users, but maybe not the buyers. And all pricing is about the buyers. So my gut says somebody more from a product marketing side. And as far as when you want to hire a standalone person, that also has some drawbacks, because if they are a standalone pricing person, they may not have the product marketing bent. So it's not always going to be additive for you to do it. I would say when your needs for analysis increase and you're always wanting to do price performance analysis, you're wanting to do a lot of math, you're wanting someone to own it. So there is a point when you become big enough as a company where you're optimizing more for pricing rather than doing 0 to 1. That's where I feel a pricing person may be more helpful. In 0 to 1, I would say a PMM is probably better suited to do it.
Makes sense. So you have a podcast, right? It's called Code to Cash. Could you talk to us more about that and why it's actually called that?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the pricing supply chain and all of the things that need to happen for pricing to go live. One of the terms I kept hearing in the industry was called quote to cash. And it wasn't ever sitting right with me because it was just a very process-based description of a very strategic function. There are so many companies, they say, we do quote to cash, quote to cash. I'm like, what does this mean? This is some inside baseball thing. And they just mean when the salesperson has to provide the quote to the customer and then when it gets closed. But as we just discussed, there is a whole supply chain of things that have to happen. Quoting is one piece. your code needs to change, and if your code is never changed, you're never going to be able to do the code or provide that. So I don't think it's quote to cash, it's actually code to cash, because you have to look at the whole supply chain to implement pricing. And that was, I think, my thought or my hypothesis is that soon we will have a whole monetization function emerging. It has already started to emerge. There are companies like yours, there are other companies who are building in that supply chain. They just don't recognize, like, we have not evangelized that as a thing, right? That
Yep.
category has to be created. But it's not for our own sake. It's just, it is self-emerging because that need already exists. And some of the things that were quote to cash or all of the older terms were actually not even for sort of companies. They were probably more quoting to cash. I don't even know which industry that even it started from. Right? Which industry did CPQ start from? Did it start from software? I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as you were just saying, right, a monetization stack is emerging, and in the 4 Ps of marketing, it was, I would say, in the past decade and a half, it was products time to shine. Right now, there's a whole product stack consisting of so many different tools out there. And slowly there's a monetization or a pricing stack that's emerging. And in the companies that you've been in, did you have to build all of these capabilities in-house? And if you could travel back in time and you could have an ideal monetization stack, what would that look like?
In some companies, I would say in usage-based companies, the problem is more dire because you have to automate everything. You have to meet, you have to bill, all of that has to be automated. If somebody comes to your website and your PL, you have to sell automatically. So that increases the engineering work necessary. If you were, let's say, a company like Medallia that was subscription software sales, you had feature flags, but professional services would turn them on or off. There was not much usage-based pricing going on there. So there not much need. I don't even think they ever had a pricing person. Okay. If they had, they were probably there for a little while, and sales did all out of that. So I've not been in usage-based companies except Twilio, even where my product was not usage-based. Oh. So I wouldn't, if I was in one of those, I would probably say differently. I would ask for different things. Given where I was, I would say that in this whole CPQ thing, it creates the time to market for pricing 9 months, a year, and every person I've met has said that it's a headache for them. It's a necessary evil. And I think that's what I want to change. Like, what I want to change, not even ideally, I'm just saying that I will try to change this right now. In a few months, you will see some new product that I will build, where all of the stuff that you do in Excel sheet from a pricing perspective will be just available out of the box. You will go into the product, configure it, and as soon as you're done, when you press publish, it will be ready for quoting and contracting. That is what would have really helped, because ideally you should just be able to upload your strategy and then for it to work. It shouldn't take all of this time, right? So that's my bone to pick with at least for sales-led companies. That is what stops them from going to market faster.
Got it. So when I was researching you / stalking you on LinkedIn and Spotify, I found something interesting. So there was a failed pricing change implementation at Narvar that you went in and you turned things around, right? So what exactly had gone wrong, and how did you approach this project? What kind of roadblocks did you hit? What were the results? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sounds good. So at Narvar, before I joined the company, now I would not say you'll get the same story if you talk to people there, because some people may disagree who worked on the previous iteration. But at least this is what I heard when I was joining, and I was told what the problem was.
Yeah.
So Narvar had hired a CRO, or this is what was explained to me. And then as a result of them joining, this pricing and packaging was changed. So Narvar was a very sales-led company and with a very excellent sales team, I would say. But they did not have standardization on pricing. Like, even the very experienced seller could take a very new feature that maybe PMs weren't even thinking of charging for, and they would sell it for 80,000. I'm like, here, we've sold it. So it required some standardization and process, because you need some price book, you need some guidelines.
Yes.
So that initiative led to the creation of, I would say, 12 to 14 tiers across 3 product lines. But I thought, it may have been done too fast. The second is, it may have been done from an SMB standpoint with very little customization of these packages. But our sales team was mostly an enterprise sales team, and they required the ability to customize the package to customers more. So for example, if I sold you a package in which I sold you 3 emails, but if you needed 5, then an SMB tiering will say, now I want you to upgrade your tier.
Yep.
That's a lot of work for anyone to do, and the customer has like, why should I pay 1.5x more for 2 emails, right? That's the question that would happen. But the sales team needed to just have a package and then sell as many emails in that as possible. You didn't want to differentiate based on that number of emails, right? Yep. So as a result, what had happened when I had joined and I saw the numbers that the ASPs were going down, and there was a sort of a rebellion in the sales team. They were just not using it, not happy with the packaging. So
the new packaging that had come up?
Yes.
Okay.
So they had reverted back to old pricing models. It was sort of a free-for-all. And that CRO had left before I joined. So that's why I'm saying a little bit of this is what I heard, because I did not experience it. Yep. I saw the results and ramifications. So my process was I was just like, you tell me what the problem is, and making sure that people get it. So pricing strategy work is a lot about alignment. So I can come up with many, many different examples of packages. Then I have to sit down with all of the salespeople. This is pre-COVID, so that was easy because I can actually physically sit down with them and say, yep, well, if this was there, would you be able to sell it? If that was there, would you be able to sell it? Or what would be the problem? So this is not a discussion of price points at all. We're just first deciding, can you sell it this way if you package it like this? Yep. And so I got feedback from sales, I got feedback from our CEO. There was also disagreement there. We had to reconcile that disagreement, because our CEO was hearing more from venture capitalists that it should just be limited packages, more simple, right? So there is a need for simplicity, but sales need more things to sell. The more things that they have to sell, the more money they can make. So you have to strike a balance somewhere. So a lot of that was negotiation around how to do it. So then we may get some sort of simplicity direction from the CEO. Then we will try to go back to him, like, give us a little bit more flexibility, give us a little bit more. So that was the tweaking of packaging. And so once packaging is done, most of the pricing work is math and modeling, and that can be done based on empirical data you have. Then once you have it, then you can tell the sales team, this is what I'm thinking, and you can always increase the discount rates available for a new model so that they are not going to be forced to sell us at a certain price if they're not able to. So we did all of that. Not only were we actually saved from a massive revenue shortfall in the quarter of COVID, when COVID had just started, but later on this picked up really well. ASPs went up. Eventually we deployed CPQ. All of the salespeople started to use it. Even before we deployed CPQ, we were uploading a snapshot of our calculators in Salesforce. So there was compliance from the sales team, because I had spoken to them multiple times. And because I had done that, I was able to get buy-in. They felt they were heard, and this is how, at least it matched how they were selling. And something interesting I also found out is that one of the products where we were trying to be competitive and we reduced the price, we got negative discount rates for one of the tiers, because sales would, because they also have their incentive to make more money, right? So they would increase the price and sell it. So there are some interesting things you find out, and some interesting dynamics you find. On paper, you'll think something will happen, but when you actually get the data, something else happens.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all the questions that I had. And before we actually finish the podcast, I do have a lightning round. Mm-hmm. So just off the top of your head, whatever the answers are, mm-hmm, we'll just go quickly at it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if you had all the money in the world and you couldn't do pricing, like that could not be your job, what mm-hmm. would you do for the rest of your life?
That's a very hard question.
It's very
all the money in the
question.
world. Yeah. Honestly, probably would leave tech altogether, and maybe I would start a university or something, a new age university, which taught both science, but it also taught metaphysics and spirituality. So a mix of that.
Oh, wow. I've asked this question to a lot of people, and this is the first someone who said they start a university. Most people just say, "Oh, I just want to start a cafe."
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Okay, so what is your favorite book?
I would say the favorite author, and then he has
Yeah.
a few books. So there is a performance coach. His name is Kapil Gupta. He lives in LA. If you go to his Twitter page or if you go to YouTube, you'll find a lot of people have transcribed what he says. So I find that he's one of the best performance coaches, and he's sort of bordering on performance coaching and spirituality. So he's one of the top authors, in my opinion, that has really helped me over the last few years.
Nice. Okay, a lot of spirituality. Okay, so what are some good quality pricing resources? Obviously, other than Price
Yeah.
to Scale,
Yes.
once again, is one of the best literature out there. I had posted yesterday on LinkedIn, and there were people saying I learned most of my SaaS pricing strategy by reading that book, right?
Right.
So yeah, anyway, resources other than your book.
Yeah, I do not claim to be the original source of things. I'm more of a survey. I've synthesized things, but
Yeah,
the person I love is Tomas Tangus. He's a venture capitalist. He is one of the few people who didn't do clickbait, right? Most of the stuff I found was like top 7 things, top 12 pricing strategies. So in my opinion, there are no top 12
SEO.
pricing strategies.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what you find. But he was the one who distilled things down most, and he has references to some other articles, or at least he's been around the block in the valley enough, and he's seen enough startups, and he's the only VC talking about pricing who has that much depth. So Tomas is someone I really appreciate. Outside of that, I follow on LinkedIn. There is a person. He's not a pricing person per se. He's a SaaS metrics person. I think his name is Todd Gardner. I very often look forward to his posts because I find a lot of information on benchmarks, unit economic benchmarks, SaaS benchmarks from his posts that are relevant to pricing. So these two names, of course, I had seen a lot of Patrick Campbell's work when I was starting out. So that's widely available, and often that is where people get started initially.
Got it. My next question was going to be people to follow in pricing, but I think you answered that in the previous question itself. Okay, that's amazing. Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for coming in. And where can people find you?
LinkedIn is easiest. Just search for my name, Ajit Ghuman, or you can go to the website of the book, pricetoscale.com.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. See you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found that valuable. See you in the next episode.